Rich father forces his son to marry the family's humble assistant, but he shocks everyone. Want to know how this incredible story ends? Stay until the end. You'll be amazed. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our exciting stories. The crystal chandeliers of the Harrison mansion cast elegant shadows across Alexander Harrison's face as he stood in his father's study, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. At 32, he was the heir to Harrison Industries, one of Boston's most prestigious real estate development companies. Yet, at this moment, he felt like a powerless child. "This is absurd, father. You can't possibly expect me to marry Sarah." Alexander's voice echoed against the mahogany-paneled walls, but William Harrison remained unmoved behind his massive desk, his silver hair and steel-grey eyes reflecting decades of unwavering authority. "I can, and I do," William replied, his voice carrying the weight of generations of family legacy. "Your reckless behavior has gone on long enough. The tabloids are having a field day with your latest scandal, and our investors are getting nervous." Alexander ran his fingers through his dark hair, frustration evident in every movement. Sarah Mitchell, their family's assistant for the past 5 years, had been nothing but a background figure in his life. She was efficient, quiet, and completely ordinary, everything he wasn't. "She's an employee, for God's sake," Alexander protested, pacing the Persian rug. "What makes you think she'd even agree to this ridiculous arrangement?" William's lips curved into a knowing smile that made Alexander's stomach turn. "She already has." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. He stopped pacing, turning slowly to face his father. "What?" "I spoke with her this morning," William continued, his voice maddeningly calm. "She understands the arrangement perfectly. In exchange for marrying you and helping to rehabilitate your public image, she'll receive a significant position within the company and financial security for her family." Alexander's mind raced to the few interactions he'd had with Sarah over the years. She was always there, quietly competent, handling everything from family events to crisis management with unflappable efficiency. But he'd barely spoken more than a few words to her at a time, had never really looked at her beyond noting her presence. "This is the 21st century, father. You can't just arrange marriages like some medieval monarch, can't I?" William stood, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the study. "Let me be clear, Alexander. Either you agree to this marriage and begin taking your responsibilities seriously, or you can kiss your inheritance goodbye. I'm sure your cousin James would be more than happy to step into your shoes." The threat wasn't empty. Alexander knew his father well enough to recognize when he was deadly serious. The mention of James, his ambitious cousin who'd always waited in the wings, made his blood run cold. "You're bluffing," Alexander said, but his voice lacked conviction. William walked to the window, looking out over the manicured gardens where generations of Harrisons had walked before them. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Sarah will be here at 9 o'clock. If you refuse, you can pack your things and leave. Your trust fund will be frozen, your position in the company terminated, and everything you've taken for granted your entire life will disappear." Alexander felt the walls closing in around him. His father had finally found the perfect way to force his hand, threaten everything he'd been groomed to inherit since birth. The worst part was knowing that Sarah had agreed to this scheme. Had she been planning this all along? Was her quiet efficiency just a mask for ambition? As if reading his thoughts, William turned back to face his son. "Don't blame Sarah for this. The poor girl has been working 3 jobs to support her younger sister through college and her mother's medical treatments. She's exactly what this family needs, someone who understands the value of hard work and responsibility." The revelation about Sarah's family situation caught Alexander off guard. He'd never bothered to learn anything about her personal life, had never cared to ask. Now, that information was being used as another weapon against him. "I need air," Alexander muttered, turning toward the door. As he reached for the handle, his father's voice stopped him. "Remember, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And Alexander, don't even think about running away from this. You know I'll find you." Alexander yanked the door open and stormed out, his footsteps echoing through the grand hallway. As he passed the family portraits lining the walls, generations of Harrisons seemed to watch him with judgment in their painted eyes. Near the main entrance, he caught a glimpse of movement. Sarah, carrying a stack of files, disappearing around a corner. The sight of her made his chest tighten with a mixture of anger and something else he couldn't quite name. How dare she agree to this? How dare she think she could just step into his world and claim a place in it? But as he burst through the front doors into the cool evening air, another thought nagged at him. How dare he assume she had any choice in the matter? His father's manipulations had trapped them both, turning them into pawns in his grand plan to secure the Harrison legacy. The sun was setting over the Boston skyline, casting long shadows across the mansion's grounds. Alexander loosened his tie, feeling like it was choking him. Tomorrow morning, he would have to make a decision that would alter the course of his entire life. And for the first time, he wasn't sure which option terrified him more, losing everything he'd been born to inherit or marrying a woman he'd never truly seen. Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she organized the files in her small office adjacent to the mansion's library. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked relentlessly toward 9 o'clock, each sound echoing like a hammer against her nerves. She smoothed down her simple navy dress, the most professional outfit she owned, and tried to steady her breathing. Through the thin walls, she could hear Alexander's arrival, his footsteps heavy with resignation. She'd witnessed his explosive exit yesterday evening, had seen the fury in his expression as he'd stormed past her. The memory made her stomach churn. "Miss Mitchell," William Harrison's voice through the intercom made her jump. "Please join us in my study." Sarah took one final deep breath, squared her shoulders, and gathered her dignity around her like armor. As she walked the familiar path to William's study, memories of the previous morning's conversation played in her mind. "Your mother's cancer treatments aren't covered by insurance anymore," William had said, his voice gentle but his eyes calculating. "And your sister's college tuition is due next month, isn't it?" The weight of her family's needs pressed down on her shoulders. Her mother, once vibrant and strong, now confined to a hospital bed. Her sister Amy, brilliant and deserving of every opportunity Sarah had missed. The mounting bills that kept her awake at night. "I'm not forcing you, Sarah," William had continued. "I'm offering you a solution that benefits everyone. Marry Alexander, help him mature into his responsibilities, and I'll ensure your family is taken care of. Plus, you'll have a real future in this company. The career advancement you've earned, but would take years to achieve otherwise." Now, as she entered the study, both men turned to look at her. William sat behind his desk, emanating authority, while Alexander stood by the window, his expression unreadable. Sarah forced herself to meet their gazes, refusing to show weakness. "Good morning," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. Alexander's eyes narrowed as he studied her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. Sarah knew what he saw. A plain, practical woman in her late 20s, with brown hair pulled back in a simple bun and minimal makeup. She wasn't glamorous like the women he usually dated, wasn't part of their privileged world. "Well, Alexander," William prompted, "have you made your decision?" The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. Alexander moved away from the window, his jaw tight. "I have conditions." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. He was accepting? She'd been half convinced he would rather lose everything than marry her. "Name them," William said, leaning back in his chair. "First, this marriage lasts exactly 1 year. After that, we divorce quietly, and Sarah gets a generous settlement." Alexander's voice was cold, businesslike. "Second, we maintain separate residences. The press can think what they want, but I'm not playing house." "Unacceptable," William cut in. "You'll live together in the lake house. It's private enough to give you space, but public enough to be convincing. Next condition?" Alexander's fists clenched. "Fine. Third, Sarah continues working as your assistant. I don't want her involved in my business or my life beyond what's absolutely necessary for appearances." Actually, Sarah found her voice. Surprising both men, I have conditions of my own. Alexander's eyebrows shot up, a mix of surprise and annoyance crossing his features. William's lips curved into a slight smile. By all means, Miss Mitchell, William gestured for her to continue. Sarah straightened her spine. First, I want a position as junior executive in the company's charitable foundation. Not as a gift, but as an opportunity to prove myself. Second, I want full transparency about the company's dealings. No secrets, no surprises. If I'm risking my reputation in this marriage, I need to know exactly what I'm getting into. You don't trust us, Miss Mitchell? William asked, but his tone suggested approval rather than offense. I trust that everyone in this room has their own agenda, she replied carefully. I'm just making sure mine is equally considered. Alexander barked out a laugh, but it held no humor. Well, isn't this perfect? Father, you found yourself quite the strategist. She'll fit right in with the family manipulation games. Don't, Sarah turned to him, her voice sharp. Don't pretend you know anything about me or my motivations. You've barely spoken 10 words to me in 5 years, despite seeing me almost every day. You never once asked about my life, my family, or my dreams. So please, spare me your judgments. The room fell silent. Alexander stared at her as if seeing a ghost. The ghost of the invisible woman she'd been all these years, suddenly given voice and substance. William cleared his throat. I accept all conditions from both parties. Now, shall we discuss the practical details? The wedding needs to happen within the month to counter the recent negative publicity. A month? Sarah and Alexander spoke simultaneously, then glanced at each other in surprise. Yes, William continued, pulling out a folder. We'll craft a story about a private, long-term relationship that you've kept out of the public eye. Sarah's position in the family business makes it believable. The press will love it. The reformed playboy and the hard-working assistant, a modern fairy tale. There's nothing fairy tale about this, Alexander muttered. On the contrary, William replied, this is exactly how fairy tales really work. Practical arrangements that benefit everyone, dressed up in romance for public consumption. Now, Sarah, I've taken the liberty of arranging a meeting with our PR team this afternoon. Alexander, you'll join her. We need to get your story straight before the announcement. Sarah felt lightheaded. Everything was moving so fast, spinning beyond her control. Yet when she thought of her mother's tired smile and her sister's dreams of medical school, she found her resolve. One last thing, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Whatever our private arrangements, in public, we treat each other with respect. No snide comments, no visible resentment. If we're doing this, we do it properly. Alexander studied her for a long moment, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Agreed, he said finally. We're both professionals. We can act professionally. Excellent, William stood, satisfaction evident in his bearing. Sarah, please show Alexander the lake house this afternoon after the PR meeting. You'll both need to start moving in by the end of the week to establish the relationship narrative. As they left the study, Sarah felt Alexander's presence behind her like a physical weight. They walked in silence through the mansion's halls until they reached the front entrance. I'll have my driver pick you up at 2 for the PR meeting, Alexander said stiffly. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she watched him walk away, his expensive suit a stark contrast to her simple dress, she wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life or secured her family's future. Perhaps, she reflected grimly, both could be true. The lake house loomed before them, a modernist masterpiece of glass and stone nestled among towering pines. 3 weeks had passed since their hastily arranged wedding. A private ceremony with close family, according to the press releases. Now, on their first morning as official residents, Sarah stood in the vast kitchen, clutching her coffee mug like a lifeline. The silence was deafening. Alexander had disappeared into his home office the moment they'd arrived last night, leaving Sarah to settle into what felt like an elaborate stage set for their performance. The house was beautiful but cold, much like their arrangement. Her phone buzzed with a text from Amy. "How's married life with Prince Charming?" Sarah's throat tightened. She hadn't told her sister or mother the truth about the marriage. They'd been so happy, so relieved when the Harrison family had generously taken care of the medical bills and university tuition. Her mother's treatments were progressing well, and Amy was thriving in her pre-med courses. The price of their happiness was Sarah's truth. The sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. Alexander appeared in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his dark hair perfectly styled. He paused when he saw her, as if surprised to find someone else in his space. "There's coffee," Sarah offered, gesturing to the pot she'd brewed. "I get my coffee from Maurice's on the way to the office," he replied curtly, then seemed to catch himself. "But, thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. Sarah took a deep breath. "We should discuss how to handle the Hamptons charity gala this weekend. It'll be our first public appearance as a married couple." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I've attended plenty of galas. I know how to handle myself." "Yes, I'm aware. I've spent the last 5 years managing the fallout from how you handle yourself at such events." The words slipped out before she could stop them. To her surprise, Alexander's lips twitched in what might have been almost a smile. "Touché, Miss Mitchell, or should I say Mrs. Harrison. Sarah is fine," she said quietly, "at least when we're alone." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. The PR team sent over a briefing for the gala. Key people to be seen with, approved topics of conversation, photo opportunities, standard procedure. "I know, I used to prepare those briefings." Sarah set down her coffee mug. "But this time, we need to be more than just seen together. People will be watching for signs of genuine connection. Your father's whole plan rests on convincing everyone that this marriage has reformed you." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its perfect arrangement. "And how exactly do you suggest we manufacture genuine connection?" "We start by learning about each other," Sarah said firmly. "Basic things that any married couple would know. Your coffee preference from Morris's, for instance. I should know that. Just as you should know that I take my coffee with 1 sugar and a splash of cream." "What's the point?" Alexander demanded, his frustration breaking through. "This isn't real. In 11 months and 1 week, we'll get a quiet divorce. You'll have your settlement and your career advancement, and we can go back to our separate lives." Sarah stood, squaring her shoulders. "The point is that I have sacrificed just as much as you for this arrangement, if not more. My reputation, my privacy, my chance at real love, all of it is on the line. So yes, we're going to learn each other's coffee preferences, favorite foods, and daily habits. We're going to make this convincing, because that's what we both agreed to do." Alexander stared at her, seeming to truly see her for a moment. "Fine," he said finally. "Brief me over dinner tonight, 7 o'clock. I'll bring food from, where would you prefer?" "La Maison on 5th Street, Sarah replied without hesitation. "Their coq au vin is extraordinary." Another almost smile flickered across his face. "French cuisine, you continue to surprise me." "Miss Sarah..." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. "I have to go. Board meeting this morning." He hesitated at the door. 7 o'clock. After he left, Sarah let out a long breath. Progress, however small, was still progress. She turned to her laptop, pulling up the latest reports from the Harrison Foundation. Her new position started officially next week, and she was determined to prove herself worthy of it, arranged marriage aside. Hours later, Sarah sat in her new office at Harrison Industries, reviewing proposals for the Foundation's next initiative. A knock at her door made her look up. Linda Chen, the Foundation's director and her new boss, stood in the doorway. "How's the golden cage treating you?" Linda asked, closing the door behind her. Sarah tensed. Linda had been her mentor for the past 2 years, the only person who'd noticed her potential beyond administrative work. "I don't know what you mean." Linda gave her a knowing look. "Please, I've known William Harrison for 20 years. This whole whirlwind romance story, not his style. He's a strategist, and you're his latest move." "Linda, Don't worry." Linda held up a hand. "Your secret's safe with me. But Sarah, be careful. The Harrisons, they play a different kind of game. William might seem benevolent, but he didn't build this empire by being nice. Sarah's stomach churned. Have you heard something? Linda hesitated. Just keep your eyes open, especially around the Riverside Development Project. Something doesn't add up in the numbers, but every time I try to dig deeper, I hit a wall. Before Sarah could press for more details, her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Meeting ran late. Dinner at 8 instead of 7? Duty calls? Linda asked, noting Sarah's expression. Something like that. Sarah managed a smile. Thank you, Linda, for everything. After Linda left, Sarah stared at her computer screen, mind racing. The Riverside Project was William's latest pride and joy, a massive waterfront development that promised to revitalize a struggling neighborhood. But if Linda, with her decades of experience, was concerned, Sarah pulled up the project files, determined to understand what had her mentor worried. As she dug through financial reports and permit applications, a pattern began to emerge. Small discrepancies, nothing obvious, but together they painted a troubling picture. Her phone buzzed again. On my way, brought wine to go with the coco van. Sarah quickly saved her findings and shut down her computer. She had 11 months to uncover the truth about the Riverside Project, and to figure out if William Harrison's benevolence was as genuine as it appeared. But tonight, she had to focus on a different challenge, making her fake marriage look real enough to fool Boston's elite at the upcoming gala. As she drove home through the gathering dusk, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stumbled onto something much bigger than an arranged marriage. The question was, could she trust her reluctant husband with her suspicions, or was Alexander part of whatever his father was hiding? The lake house lights glowed warmly in the darkness, and she could see Alexander's car already parked in the drive. Time to play house with a man who'd rather be anywhere else. But as Sarah parked her car, she squared her shoulders. She hadn't come this far to back down now. Whatever secrets the Harrisons were hiding, she would find them. She just hoped the truth wouldn't cost her everything she was fighting to protect. The Hamptons Charity Gala transformed the Boston Museum of Fine Arts into a glittering showcase of wealth and power. Sarah stood before a mirror in one of the museum's private preparation rooms, hardly recognizing herself. The midnight blue gown William's stylist had chosen flowed like liquid silk, making her feel both elegant and exposed. Her usually simple hair had been transformed into soft waves, and subtle makeup enhanced her features. "You look beautiful," Alexander's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, resplendent in his tuxedo, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she replied softly, fighting the unexpected flutter in her stomach. The past week of enforced proximity had changed something between them. Their nightly dinners, initially tense information exchanges, had gradually evolved into real conversations. She'd learned that he loved spicy food but hated cilantro, that he played chess but always lost to his father, that his mother's death when he was 12 had left a wound that never fully healed. "Ready?" He offered his arm, the picture of aristocratic grace. Fathers waiting to make the grand entrance. Sarah took his arm, noting how naturally they fell into step together. "Remember, the Carmichaels will want to discuss their daughter's charity initiative, and the Petersons will try to corner us about their son's tech startup," Alexander finished. "I did pay attention during our briefings, you know." She smiled despite herself. "A first time for everything." His low chuckle sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. They made their way through the museum's marble corridors to where William waited at the top of the grand staircase. His approving nod at their appearance couldn't quite mask the calculating look in his eyes. "Perfect timing," William said. "The press is properly primed, and our major donors are all in attendance. Sarah, remember to mention the Riverside Project's community benefits when speaking with the mayor." The mention of Riverside made Sarah's pulse quicken. She'd spent every free moment of the past week investigating the project, and what she'd found kept her awake at night. Shell companies, mysterious consultancy fees, and environmental reports that seemed suspiciously optimistic. But now wasn't the time to dwell on it. They descended the staircase as cameras flashed below. Sarah felt Alexander's hand move to the small of her back, a gesture that looked intimate to observers but served to steady her on the steep steps. The touch sent electricity through her spine. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison," reporters called out, "how's married life treating you?" Alexander pulled Sarah closer, his smile perfect and practiced. "Marriage has been a revelation," he said, his voice carrying just the right note of reformed playboy sincerity. "Sometimes the best things in life are right in front of you all along." Sarah's heart skipped a beat at his words, even knowing they were just part of the performance. She turned to him with a smile that wasn't entirely fake. "He's certainly full of surprises." The next hour passed in a whirl of strategic conversations and photo opportunities. Sarah watched Alexander work the room with the ease of someone born to it. But she noticed something different in his manner. The rakish charm that had dominated previous events was replaced by a more mature presence. When had that happened? "They're buying it," William murmured as he passed them between conversations. The prodigal son and his redemption story. Perfect. But something in his tone made Sarah uneasy. She excused herself to the powder room, needing a moment to think. In the elegant bathroom, she pulled out her phone and found a new email from Linda. Urgent. Found something about Riverside. Need to meet ASAP. Sarah's hands trembled as she typed a quick reply. The bathroom door opened, and she quickly put her phone away, turning to find Caroline Peterson entering. "Sarah, darling." Caroline's voice dripped with artificial sweetness. "Marriage clearly agrees with you. Though I must admit we were all shocked by the announcement. No one even knew you and Alexander were dating. We wanted privacy," Sarah replied smoothly. "Given Alexander's public profile, it seemed wisest." Caroline's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's just that my Thomas swears he saw Alexander at the Harbour Club with Sophia Blackwood just 2 weeks before your sudden wedding." Sarah's stomach clenched, but her face remained calm. "I'm sure Thomas was mistaken. Now, if you'll excuse me—" "Of course, dear. Oh, and congratulations on your new position with the foundation. Quite a jump from personal assistant to executive, almost as sudden as the marriage." The insinuation was clear. Sarah held her head high as she left the bathroom, but Caroline's words had hit their mark. The whispers and doubts she'd been trying to ignore came rushing back. She was so lost in thought that she nearly collided with Alexander in the hallway. He caught her arms, steadying her. "Whoa! Where's the fire?" Looking up into his concerned face, Sarah made a decision. "We need to talk, not here." Alexander studied her for a moment, then nodded. "The Egyptian wing is closed for renovation. Follow me in 2 minutes." The empty gallery was eerily beautiful, ancient artifacts casting strange shadows in the dim security lighting. Alexander was waiting by a massive sarcophagus, his bow tie slightly loosened. "What's wrong?" he asked as soon as she approached. "Everything." Sarah paced between glass cases of canopic jars. "The Riverside project. Something's not right with it. Linda's found something, and I've seen discrepancies in the numbers that don't add up. Your father's push for publicity about the community benefits feels like overcompensation. And now Caroline Peterson is asking questions about our relationship timeline." "Sarah, slow down." Alexander caught her shoulders, forcing her to stop pacing. "What exactly are you saying?" She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "I'm saying I think we're both being used, but I don't know why. This marriage, my promotion, the project, it's all connected somehow." Alexander's hands tightened on her shoulders. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Shell companies funneling money through the charitable foundation, environmental reports that ignore major concerns, community feedback that seems manufactured." She took a shaky breath. "Alexander, if any of this comes out, the scandal won't just ruin the company. People could go to jail." He released her, running a hand through his hair. "You think my father's involved in something illegal?" "I think—" Sarah stopped as voices echoed from the hallway. Without thinking, Alexander pulled her behind a large display case, pressing her against the wall. They stood frozen. barely breathing as a security guard passed by on his rounds. In the darkness, Sarah was acutely aware of Alexander's body shielding hers, the warmth of him, the faint scent of his cologne. His heart beat rapidly against her palm where it rested on his chest. The guard's footsteps faded, but neither of them moved. "Sarah," Alexander whispered, his voice hoarse. "What you're suggesting, it would destroy everything." "I know." She could barely hear her own voice over the pounding of her heart. "But if it's true, don't we have an obligation to find out?" He pulled back slightly, just enough to see her face in the dim light. Something had shifted between them, the pretense of their arranged marriage crumbling in the face of a much larger truth. "We'll need proof," he said finally. "Hard evidence, not just suspicions." "We?" Sarah searched his face. "You believe me?" Alexander's hand moved to cup her cheek, the gesture seemingly unconscious. "I believe that you're the most honest person I've ever met, and I believe that my father, for all his power and influence, is capable of anything to protect his legacy." The moment stretched between them, charged with something that had nothing to do with business or arranged marriages. Alexander's thumb brushed her cheekbone, and Sarah felt herself leaning into his touch. A distant door slammed, breaking the spell. They quickly separated, straightening their clothes and trying to slow their racing hearts. "We should get back," Sarah whispered. "People will notice we're missing." Alexander nodded, but caught her hand before she could leave. "Whatever we find out, we're in this together now. No more playing parts. We need to trust each other completely." Sarah squeezed his hand, ignoring the voice in her head that warned against trusting any Harrison. "Together," she agreed. They returned to the gala separately, slipping back into their roles as the happy couple. But everything had changed. As they posed for photos and charmed donors, their smiles held real warmth, their touches lingered naturally, and their glances carried the weight of shared secrets. William watched them from across the room, his satisfaction evident. But now Sarah wondered what he really saw when he looked at them. Was this all part of his plan? And if so, what would happen when they finally uncovered the truth? As the evening drew to a close, Alexander's hand found the small of her back again, guiding her toward the exit. The gesture felt different now, protective rather than performative. They had started the evening, playing their parts in William's carefully orchestrated drama. They were ending it as conspirators in what could either be the salvation or destruction of everything they held dear. In the car ride home, neither spoke, but their silence was heavy with unspoken words and possibilities. Sarah's phone buzzed with another message from Linda. "Meeting tomorrow, 7 a.m. Coffee shop on Charles Street. Come alone." She showed the message to Alexander, who nodded grimly. "I'll have the car drop me at the office first. We can't risk being seen together until we know more." As they pulled up to the lake house, Sarah felt the weight of their discovery pressing down on her. What had started as a simple arrangement to save her family had evolved into something far more dangerous and far more real than she'd ever imagined. Alexander helped her from the car, his hand lingering in hers. "Be careful tomorrow," he said softly. "If my father suspects anything." "I will," she promised. They stood for a moment in the moonlight, the facade of their marriage falling away to reveal something neither of them had expected to find: trust, partnership, and perhaps something even more surprising. As Sarah lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, she realized that uncovering William's secrets wasn't the only thing that terrified her anymore. Somewhere between their arranged marriage and this moment, she had started to feel something real for Alexander Harrison, and that, she feared, might be the most dangerous development of all. Dawn had barely broken over Boston when Sarah arrived at the coffee shop on Charles Street. Her heart pounded as she spotted Linda at a corner table, surrounded by papers and looking like she hadn't slept. But as Sarah approached, her mentor's grave expression sent a chill down her spine. "Linda?" Sarah slid into the seat across from her. "What's wrong?" "Everything." Linda's hands shook as she pushed a folder across the table. "The Riverside project isn't just about real estate development. It's about power and revenge. Sarah opened the folder, her eyes widening as she scanned the documents. Property records, old newspaper clippings, and financial statements told a story that made her blood run cold. 20 years ago, that same riverside area had been home to a thriving community of small businesses. William Harrison had tried to buy them out, but the owners had refused. Then, mysterious accidents and health code violations had forced them to sell at rock-bottom prices. "My God," Sarah whispered, recognizing names from her research. "The shell companies. They're the same ones from back then, just restructured." Linda nodded grimly. "William's planning to do it again. The community benefits are a smokescreen. Once the project starts, those small businesses and residents will be forced out through constructed accidents and violations. He's already placed his people in key inspection positions. But why?" Sarah's mind raced. "The Foundation's reputation is exactly what he needs to make it look legitimate." Linda leaned forward. "Sarah, one of those business owners who fought him back then, it was Alexander's mother." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. "What?" "Elizabeth Harrison discovered what her husband was doing and tried to stop him. She threatened to expose everything. A week later, she died in a car accident that was never properly investigated." Sarah felt the world tilting beneath her. "Does Alexander know?" "I don't think so. He was too young." Linda's expression softened. "But Sarah, there's more. Your father's hardware store. It wasn't random that William chose to destroy it. Your father and Elizabeth Harrison were friends. He knew things." Tears blurred Sarah's vision as the pieces fell into place. Her father's depression, his sense of betrayal, the way he'd given up. It hadn't just been about losing his business. He'd lost faith in justice itself. "William arranged our marriage," Sarah realized, her voice hollow. "Not to reform Alexander, but to keep me quiet once I discovered the truth through my foundation work. And to control Alexander," Linda added, "by giving him someone to care about, someone vulnerable to harm if he stepped out of line." Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Alexander. "Where are you? Father called an emergency board meeting." "Go," Linda urged, gathering the documents. "I'll make copies and get these somewhere safe. But Sarah, watch your back. William Harrison doesn't lose gracefully." The drive to Harrison Industries felt surreal. Sarah's mind spun with revelations, each more devastating than the last. As she pulled into the parking garage, she spotted Alexander waiting by the elevators, his face tense. "Sarah." He strode toward her, concern evident in his expression. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a secluded corner. "Alexander, I need to tell you something about your mother." 20 minutes later, they sat in Alexander's parked car, the weight of truth hanging heavy between them. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white, his face a mask of controlled fury. "All these years," he whispered. "He let me believe it was just an accident. Let me blame myself for arguing with her that morning, and now he's doing it again." The board meeting, Sarah realized. He's going to announce the next phase of Riverside. Alexander's laugh was bitter. Perfect timing, the reformed playboy and his charitable wife lending legitimacy to his grand vision. He turned to her, his eyes intense. "We have to stop him." "We will," Sarah promised, "but we need to be smart about this. One wrong move, and we'll lose everything, including any chance of justice for your mother." The elevator ride to the boardroom was tense with unspoken words. Just before the doors opened, Alexander caught Sarah's hand, squeezing it briefly. The gesture carried weeks of growing trust, understanding, and something deeper neither had dared name. William stood at the head of the boardroom, commanding as ever. His smile when he saw them was triumphant. "Ah, the happy couple, perfect timing. We're about to make history." The next hour was excruciating. Sarah watched William present his vision for Riverside, noting how skillfully he wove lies with truth. The board members nodded approvingly, completely taken in by his performance. Alexander sat beside her, outwardly calm but radiating tension she could feel. Finally, William called for a vote to approve the next phase. "All in favor?" "Wait," Alexander's voice cut through the room. He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. "Before we vote, there's something the board should see." William's smile never wavered. "Son, any concerns can be addressed after the vote, like how you addressed my mother's concerns." Alexander's words landed like bombs in the silent room. "Or how you addressed them with Sarah's father." Color drained from William's face. "Alexander." But Alexander was already moving, connecting his laptop to the presentation screen. Documents filled the display. Linda's research, combined with everything Sarah had uncovered. Property records, shell companies, suspicious accidents, all leading back to William Harrison. 20 years ago, Alexander's voice shook with controlled emotion. "My mother discovered that her husband was destroying people's lives for profit. When she threatened to expose him, she died in a mysterious accident. Now he's planning to do it again, using the Foundation's reputation as cover." The boardroom erupted in chaos. William's mask finally cracked, rage distorting his features. "You ungrateful fool! Everything I've done for this company, for your future." "No." Sarah stood beside Alexander, her voice clear and steady. "You did it for power, and you used your own son's guilt over his mother's death to control him, just like you used my family's struggles to manipulate me." Security arrived as William lunged for the presentation controls. In the confusion, Sarah saw him reach for his phone, likely to trigger whatever contingency plans he had in place. Without thinking, she knocked it from his hand. "It's over, father," Alexander said quietly. "The evidence has already been sent to the authorities and the press. Mother's finally getting justice." Hours later, Sarah sat in the lake house living room, watching news coverage of William Harrison's arrest. Alexander paced behind the couch, his emotions still running high. The marriage that had started as a business arrangement had somehow led them here, to truth, justice, and something neither had expected. "I keep thinking about what you said that first night," Alexander said suddenly, stopping his pacing. "About how I never really saw you in 5 years. You were right, I didn't see anything beyond myself back then." Sarah turned to face him. "And now?" "Now?" He moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "Now, I see everything. I see how strong you are, how brave. I see your compassion, your integrity. I see the woman I've fallen in love with." Sarah's breath caught. "Alexander, I know our marriage started as a contract," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "But somewhere between all the pretending and all the truth, it became real for me. And if you'll let me, I'd like to tear up that 1-year contract and ask you, properly this time, to be my wife. Not for show, not for business, but because I love you." Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks as she looked at this man who had changed so much, who had faced hard truths and chosen justice over family loyalty. "You know," she said softly, "I think your mother and my father would have loved to see this. Their children finding each other, finding truth, finding love. Is that a yes?" Alexander's eyes searched hers, hope and vulnerability clear in his expression. Sarah answered by pulling him close and kissing him, their first real kiss, with no audience, no pretense, just pure emotion. When they finally parted, she whispered, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Months later, they stood together at the groundbreaking of a new project. Not Riverside, which had been completely restructured with true community input, but a memorial park dedicated to Elizabeth Harrison and all those who had fought for justice. The foundation, now under Sarah's leadership, had become a true force for positive change in Boston. As Sarah watched Alexander speak to the gathered crowd about his mother's legacy and the importance of truth, she touched the simple wedding ring on her finger, not the elaborate one from their first ceremony, but a new one they had chosen together. Their story hadn't started with love, but it had found its way there through darkness, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes come from facing hard truths with an open heart. William Harrison had tried to use their marriage as a tool of control and deception. Instead, it had become a source of strength, redemption, and most surprisingly of all, genuine love. As Alexander finished his speech and returned to her side, Taking her hand naturally in his, Sarah knew that some arrangements, even those born of manipulation, could blossom into something real and lasting when nurtured by truth and courage. "Ready to go home?" Alexander asked softly. Sarah squeezed his hand, smiling at the way he still said home, like it was a miracle. "With you, always." ¿Qué harías si descubrieras que la persona que más admirabas ha estado ocultando un oscuro secreto durante años? ¿Crees que el amor verdadero puede nacer de una situación forzada o siempre estará manchado por sus orígenes? Comparte tus pensamientos en los comentarios. Me encanta leer sus opiniones y debatir con ustedes sobre estos dilemas que nos hacen reflexionar sobre el amor, la familia y la justicia. Si esta historia te hizo sentir algo especial, no olvides dejar tu like y suscribirte al canal. Activa la campanita para no perderte ninguna historia que te hará vibrar el corazón. Y si te gustó esta historia, a tu izquierda encontrarás una que te dejará sin aliento. Te prometo que cada segundo valdrá la pena. Es una de esas historias que te atrapa desde el primer momento y no te suelta hasta el final. No te la pierdas. Nos vemos en la próxima historia, donde nuevas emociones nos esperan.